The Bible is just a story about you and your every single character in the Bible, even the angry, jealous God sitting on top of some type of presumed heavenly mountain casting judgment. That's also you. It's my theory that you can get a word from anywhere. You can get a word from The Simpsons if you want to, because all you're ever seeing is yourself. You are consciousness experiencing itself. You are the game, the developer, the player, the script, the platform, the interface. You're all of it, which in effect means there isn't a you, but there's an experience of a you. So there is no great hidden secret about manifestation. The hidden secret is decoding all of the misidentifications that we've been taught to internalize by a supposed truth of separation. So that's a fancy way of saying that you were taught and bred and conditioned to think that everything is outside of you. And a large part of that conditioning and indoctrination was done so religiously, whether or not you grew up religiously or not, because we say politics and religion are separate. They are not. They are not. Look around. They clearly are not. So whether it's not a matter of having grown up in a church, it's growing up in a nation state that has declared this is who we are and this is what we do. You can't get around that. It doesn't matter if you personally accept it as your truth. So, but that aside, we don't even have to go deep. You look at a commercial and they say, "Oh, this is the new thing that you need to do if you want clear skin." And you think, "Oh gosh, I don't have clear skin. I'm separated from clear skin. So now I need to go do this thing." We're taught that everything is a do to get system. We have to do to get. So I like decoding in the way that my interpretation allows me to, decoding these ancient texts, because I think we've been led, or not think, I know that we've been led astray, that it's all you, it's a story of you. And there's different traditions of that. I mean, I'm a Gnostic, so I believe in the archons and in the false god and the different mythologies there. But that's the thing about mythology, is that we can take a story, look at the story, and find many different meanings out of the story. So while generally I think the Old Testament is a depiction of a specific God and a specific people that maybe in some historical way did happen, and that I don't necessarily agree with in terms of the worship that came out of those texts. I also think that it's a story about you. At the same time, dialectically, I think that it's a story about you. So we're going to talk about how Exodus and Numbers and Joshua, essentially the whole epic of the Israelites being freed from Pharaoh, how that's you, how understanding the esoteric, interpreting this story esoterically, meaning looking at the hidden aspects of what could have been meant, or what was meant, how that's a story of you. Because if we don't go into, like, if we don't do like an extreme deep exegesis on the topic, if we're just looking at it again through the myth and how, oh, by the way, you're watching Divine Within, transmitting to you, co-creating this moment here with you. I am an entity named Lucian, and here on Divine Within, we discuss the power within, the kingdom within, and acknowledge that reality bends from where within. So if we're looking really truly just at the general story of things, so Exodus being like Moses says, "Let my people go," and they leave physically, like the Israelites as slaves are freed physically, but I always say that they kept Pharaoh active in their mind, meaning that, how does this relate to you? You're not an oppressed Israelite in an ancient land. That the conditioning of the slave mentality, this idea that I have to do to get, that I have to earn, that I have to perform, that I have to force, that supplies are limited and I'll only be allotted a certain amount based on my status as someone who is indebted to a power structure. We're all conditioned with that to think that we have no influence over our lives, and that we're at the effect and at the victimization of things, that we must simply tolerate, endure, pray, and hope to get better, and never really do. So they left. I mean, all the plagues came. Moses called down the plagues and said, "No more. Let my people go." But they kept Pharaoh. But just because you leave, and I see this all the time, just because you leave the physical circumstance, people say, "Okay, I just need to get out of here. I just need to go move to a new town. I need to start over. I need to start fresh." Sure, that can help. It absolutely, everything can help. It absolutely can help. But the location's not the problem. It's the version of yourself that thinks it needs to flee in order to be free. That version of you is still a slave. So they left, but they still identify themselves as indebted, as slaves, as those people who had been at the effect of this tyrannical leader that was forcing them to work and to do these things that were detrimental to them. So they get freed. They carry this is the main part. They carry the consciousness of captivity. They carry like we have this consciousness. We have this consciousness that I'm here telling you that it's already done. You already won. The game is already over. You've already, the creation is finished. It's a matter of how you're aligning, meaning you're free. You have to trust that. And trust means to move forward in the unseen without verification or without validation from the seen, and to stay in that place until, so we'll talk a little bit about this, about how, the story, even though it's in the Old Testament, and I think there's a word everywhere. I think there's a word everywhere. So again, while I don't agree, because I mean the Bible really is a book of politics. If we look at the Council of Nicaea and we look at, Emperor Constantine, and how there were books that were not lost in the Bible, but that were deliberately omitted. When we look at all of the language changes in translation, why are we? I mean, I get why we were maybe translating them, but in the translations, there were. In the translations, just due to the limitations of certain languages, or due to just plain agenda, a lot of the scriptures were then changed. So there's a lot of tampering and fumbling with all ancient texts that I don't think renders them totally holistically infallible. However, we can get a word from anywhere. So the consciousness of captivity really truly was the problem, because trust requires you. Trust is a kind of knowing. It's not like blind faith, like just believe some bullshit because somebody told you. It's knowing that it's already there. So you're already free. You're already free. Whatever you think that you have to do to get free, that is part of the illusion. That's part of you being separated from this promised land that you were already your chosen people. You've already been given. So God instructs Moses to lead the Israelites out of Pharaoh's leadership, and there's going to be freedom. There's going to be a land of milk and honey. There's going to be abundance. There's divine inheritance. There's a land. It's the land of the Canaanites. It's already prepared, but the wilderness becomes this liminal space. I see it, this in between space. And I'm sure if you're watching this, you resonate with that. This space to where there's a promise, there's an understanding, there's a path forward. I'm walking the path forward, but in order to stay on the path, I have to stay in the consciousness of the destination. And there is no true destination, but in that which you desire, you have to stay in the consciousness of being the person that already has that. And that wilderness where you're not seeing any movement, right? You're not seeing any movement. You're not seeing anything change. You don't feel like anything's changed. You're still wanting. You're still very attached. You're still dependent upon the idea that if this thing doesn't work out, then, and then there's a then, and then there's this negative fixation on the potential outcomes that are outside of that which you desire. So that's that liminal space. That's that middle. That's what I think is represented when they're out there, because numbers, then, so after Exodus, then there's numbers, not chronologically, but then numbers happens, and you see in like, the story starts, I guess, in Exodus 1, but when we get to like numbers 13 and 14, uh, Moses is like, what's wrong? What's wrong with you people? Why? And there's even mentions that like, God is mad at me. Moses is saying God is mad at me because y'all's behavior, because of your lack of trust, your lack of faith, because they do end up getting to, so they're wandering the wilderness, and they finally find, meaning you start to see signs, right? You start to see signs, and they get there. So they send some spies, right? Because this is, I mean, imagine, this is like a people, this is like a whole enslaved generation of people that have been freed. So this is not, I don't imagine it to be one or two, 10, 20 people, like a whole horde, a whole population of people. And they send some spies to this Canaan, to the land of the Canaanites, and they come back, and they come back with stuff. They come back with fruit. And again, you can look at, I'm not, reading it scripture to scripture, but I'm telling you the story. I'm looking at the mythos of this, the lesson that we can ascertain from the mythology of this, because, as to, again, there's so much. I'm learning that there's so much political underpinning as to what was even put into the Bible, that to say that it's historically factually accurate in any kind of way, I think would maybe even be the wrong focus, because there's a mythos there. And the mythos is like, they want you to bow down, they want you to be ashamed, they want you to be angry, they want you to be begging from some God that tells you should be guilty because you were born. And like, that's that we're not on that. We're not on that. But there is a word in there. So we're going to look at the word. So they go and they investigate this land, and they come back and they're like, yeah, so there's milk, there's honey, there's definitely resources. We can foresee a promised land being there, but it's occupied. But it's occupied. Okay, well, occupied with what? So what? Giants. It's occupied with giants. It's occupied with giants, and then everybody starts panicking. They're like, "Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! 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 Oh no!" So the Lord apparently freed us. It freed us to wander in this land. We've been in this land for I don't know how long, and then we get there. Then we get to this allegedly. I mean, like, you should be able to hear yourself in this. Allegedly, we get to this so-called promised land, and it's occupied with giants. God just wants to kill us. God wants us to die. We are not the chosen people. Obviously, we're not the chosen people. We have been enslaved, led into the wilderness, and then like, cattle into a meat house set up for slaughter. There's this is unviable. This is untenable. What have we been doing here? Is that guy even a prophet? Like, I mean, just imagine all of the panic and all of the stirring. This promised land, because we think that what we want is just going to fall into our laps without any kind of challenge associated with it. And I think that's why manifestation it can feel as though, like, maybe if you start manifesting abundance, it seems as though I've never had more bills, I've never felt more broke. And I think that those are actually opportunities. I wouldn't say exactly tests, but I do believe that, it is the pattern of, as I'm ascending from this pattern, you're going to feel those backbiting blows, that pattern that was already in rhythm. I've talked about this, that was already in sequence. um, it's going to continue. Even just because you've now realigned your consciousness, that doesn't mean that it's not still in sequence. So because these were people that had to fight for their freedom, yes, they will have to quote unquote fight for that land, but it's documented in the text that God said, this is already for you. I'm already going to be there with you in the fight. So yeah, there's that last remnants of, do we have to work for it? Do we have to earn it? Like, no, that's not the actual truth of the situation. You will be funded and supported and everything, but you still have to go forth. You still have to confront that consciousness that says, I have to fight for what is already given. So I see that as kind of like, that's that remnants, that rhythm that had continued going. But the rhythm is an illusion, because that version of reality, to where you are indebted to a people, to a slave master, and to where you have to work for somebody else in order just to sustain yourself, that is already gone. But the people panic. But the people panic, and going back to this, you know, wilderness. We look at when the spies returned back to the wilderness as they're about to enter? We see really two things emerge out of that. Is that, one, they bring back the promise, meaning they bring back the fruit of the situation, of the land, of like, okay, this is what we got coming to us. But there's that other aspect, to where we see the promise, but we see the challenge. And the first generation that was brought out of Pharaoh's rule, the first generation of Israelites, they never actually reached their promised land. Because if we do look specifically at Numbers 13:33, it talks about how we seemed ourselves like grasshoppers, talking talking about how they saw themselves relative to the giants that were in the land. We seemed ourselves like grasshoppers. So this would have to be a transition in identity, right? Because they can't continue to see themselves as the slaves that were beaten, that were whipped, that were low, that were losing, that were down. They have to see themselves. And I mean, I'm making this part up, but they would have to see themselves as worthy, as God's people, as as the strong, as the courageous, as the powerful. They would have to say, do you understand it? It's that rhythm that was going, right? The rhythm that appeared to to have continued from we were subjugated out of Egypt. We were the oppressed people. Now we're in this nowhere man's land, and we're back to, like, why don't we just go back to Pharaoh? At least we knew we had three hots and a cot. Like, at least there was something predictable. There's nothing predictable about this. This is all gone kaput. All these plagues, all this stuff, all this hoorah, this hoopla, and here we are. Here we are again in the same situation, but it's not the same situation. It appears to be, because there is a rhythm of that, of being the subjugated people. So what God was asking them to, I don't even view it as like, okay, like go to war with the Canaanites and like you're going to kill them, you're going to wipe them out, it's going to be good. I don't even really see that it was so much about that. Again, if we look at this metaphysically, I see that it's like, no, you are going to have to transition, shift, and release the slave mentality, the version of yourself that is waiting for somebody's approval, that is waiting for someone else to do the doing for you. You are now the doers. You are the inheritors of this land, but you got to look like it, think like it, act like it. This is already yours. You're not going to be subjugated again. But again, the point that we see is we seemed ourselves, their self-concept was still that of like grasshoppers. Because imagine, they probably felt like grasshoppers under Pharaoh. And the whole thing being about how they saw themselves. So this later, the whole story really later picks up somewhere in the New Testament, along with Hebrews and Jacob, his people. They end up making it into the promised land, but the first generation never actually. They don't go. So again, this is all you. I think this is everything you see is the story of you unfolding. So we can look at the Bible and find different myths that lead us to different conclusions. If we look at metaphysical meanings, they, because of fear, they never revised their self-concept. I mean, if anything, again, that's just the message. I mean, I could say more things, but like that's the message, because they never came to see themselves as a powerful people that could inherit a land that was given to them, regardless. Again, this is regardless of the circumstance. They never they never did enter that promise. And I'm here. You've co-created this moment here with me. I'm here telling you, like, the promise is here. Your promised land, your heaven on earth, as I like to refer to it, which is some version of your personalized vision, your higher vision of peace, freedom, abundance, security, and love. Anything we're trying to manifest falls under one of those five categories. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. And all of those things together just mean unity with God, just mean unity with the all, with the all that can be. You are an individualized expression of that. You're a conscious expression of that, because the grass is just as much a God as you are. But the grass is, I won't say not conscious, but at least in a way that we have not found to be conscious. I don't know that the grass is not willing itself to be cut every Tuesday. I can't even everything. I can't even say that now. Everything's so unknown. We only see 0.001% of the light spectrum. So what do we really know about anything? But the story of Exodus is the story of you. So the question is, are you going to enter your promise? First of all, you have to decide what your promise is. Because again, the promised land, that's vague, but it essentially means security, abundance, peace, freedom. So what's your promise? And perhaps the reason that you've not entered it is simply because you're in a version of yourself that doesn't believe it deserves it. That it's there. It's already there. Everything's already actually set up. It's that timeline is waiting for you. The task is not to fix this version of yourself on this timeline. It's to ascend to a version of yourself where those circumstances, whatever it is that is that which you desire, to know that those circumstances are already the case. That is the comfortable version of self. So it's not to, I gotta fix myself now. I gotta increase my self-esteem, and I gotta work on my thoughts, and I gotta, because the version of you doing those things, I mean, you absolutely should be working, quote unquote, on yourself to ascend to different frequencies so that you can become aware of different things. But it's not about fixing yourself so that things can change on this timeline. It is exiting this timeline altogether. There is a timeline of there's a timeline of the Israelite people during the point in time. And again, it wasn't written when it happened, and the value here is mostly mythological. But there is a version of them, there's a timeline of them that God's, meaning the all was saying, it's there, it's yours, it's here. That timeline is already written. But because they were entering that land in the frequency and in the self-understanding and on the timeline as the oppressed and enslaved people, they never actually even saw the perspective of the desire of the finished product, of the fact that it's already there. They were thinking, well, how are we going to fight our way there? What are we going to do? They were caught in the humanized logistics of the situation when the logistics had nothing. And that's the message from God, right? That's the message of this law of assumption, law of attraction, law of resonance, law of laws, law of being, law of polarity. That's the message, is that the human logistics, like what we're seeing here on the outside is but a shadow, but a mirror, but a reflection. The how gets worked out by mysterious and miraculous means, should we allow them to be such. But if we're so closed on it has to happen this way, we're limiting ourselves and really creating a situation of dependence and resistance that guarantees we'll never get what we want. So the message here today is that it's already here. You're already free, but you have to see yourself as free, because you can be free and still be a slave in the mind. And that's why that's the intention of these transmissions every day, or not every day, but as they occur, as they come out of me, is to remind you that you're already free. Your heaven on earth is already here. It's already promised to you. You already have that which you desire to be, because it's available to you now already. The substance of that which you desire is already here. The Israelites never felt free. They never felt free, and they never really fully trusted that this promised land was there. Even when they got there, they still had a million and three reasons as to why it wasn't there. They never actually felt within themselves that this was true for them. So therefore, it never appeared to them to be the case. I wonder if on a metaphysical, like on a timeline level, if they only ever even saw those enemies, like if they only ever perceived of the enemies of this land that was occupied, because they were still in a victimized state of, we have to fight and struggle for everything that we're given. Perhaps there was a version of reality where they were able to walk into the land and it was not occupied, because if they had seen themselves as victors, as champions, as quote unquote God's chosen people, as it was told in the story, as already possessing this land, then they might not have even perceived the enemies as being there, or whether they were there or not there, the enemies would not have been the stopping point, and that being the point of what I have to say. So whatever it is that you're not seeing in your reality, it's because you haven't aligned with the version of yourself to where that circumstantial, external, mirrored cue of what appears to be. So that's what I'm saying, that the external stuff has nothing to do with it. But perhaps you're identifying with a version of yourself that is not in alignment with the possession of those things and with that lived reality. So then you're trying to fix yourself, and you're actually doing all of this work to reaffirm your limits. Whereas you just skip all that. Just like, it's done. It's here. Because I am. I am that I am, which is an emotional transmission, which means nothing truly on an intellectual level. Signing off today's transmission, I am an entity named Lucian here on Divine Within. Check out the show notes for the Liberation Chronicle, which is the the written word of this platform. Dispatches from the Edge of Obvious, which is a more philosophical take on these same topics that is exclusive to Spotify. And you'd like my one-on-one assistance navigating your internalized challenges that you might be having in this process of living consciously and commanding your life with direction and aim successfully. If you'd like assistance with that, I would direct you to my one-on-ones down below. There's 45 minutes, 90 minutes. I can do packages if you want a more extended contact, and email coaching as well for some of you that might be a little bit more shy. So until then, remember to be good to yourselves and others, because everyone's just a version of you anyway.